So you
Beth, I'm so glad you're here. You are just this force, this mecca of of knowledge when it comes to special education, and we're just so honored to have you.
Leena, I am so delighted to talk to you. You know, every conversation we have is always brilliant and uplifting, and I'm really happy and honored that you invited me to join you on your podcast.
Yes, yes. Okay, now I have to just share with our audience. You took something, you saw an issue in special education, not just an issue, like a systemic problem. You saw that and you created an entire organization that addressed it. So I want to just start with your origin story. What was the problem that you saw, and how did you come up with the solution to it?
Well, I kind of just fell into it, to tell you the truth. My training and background was in Syracuse University, and the focus of our training was all including all kids in gen ed. So kids that in other places people would have in other environments, other schools, we included them all. And that's what I learned how to do. It was just second nature to me. And then when I moved back to sort of the area where I grew up, nobody was doing anything even close to that. Not even, it was like, so I felt like I moved to another country. Like that's how different the practice was. So I taught in a few different places, trying to bring what I knew to situations, some successfully, some unsuccessfully. And I decided to take a year off of teaching to try to find a school system that was in alignment with those values that I brought from Syracuse about inclusion. And so I thought I would do a little consulting on the side while I was looking for this school district. So simultaneously, I had gotten involved with a parent organization, mostly parents of kids who were labeled with significant disabilities, severe disabilities, who wanted their kids included. And so I became their sounding board, and then they started asking their school districts to hire me because they had these beautiful kids that nobody knew how to include, who functioned significantly differently than kids who were at their age level in their grade span. And that's how I got started doing this. And so districts started to hire me because here's this kid with intellectual disability and cerebral palsy, and we don't know what to do with them. And their parents want them in a gen ed class. And so that's how I started this work. And now 32 plus years later, um, my business has grown through word of mouth, and we support all aspects of inclusion. Unfortunately, very few people want to do what I started with. Very few school districts want to take that on. Mostly, we're supporting people to co-teach. And sometimes we're really working on inclusion, the full piece of including all kids.
Whoa,
Did I
so
answer your
so much,
question?
so much to unpack, because I heard things like the parents want their students included, and that's not often encouraged, and I also heard you throw out terms like there's co-teaching and there's inclusion.
Mhm.
What is there a difference?
Oh, yeah, there sure is. So, inclusion is a philosophy, Lena. It's a philosophy
Mm.
that says we all belong together. And it really has nothing to do with school. It's really about how you view the world. It's really how you about, and so people will say, of course I'm inclusive. But then we see things like white people moving out of communities when brown people move in. And we recently had a neighborhood close to where I live where a group home of adults with disabilities was moving in and the community protested. That's not an inclusive mindset. Yeah. So inclusion is that we all belong together and we've got to figure it out. And we're going to make spaces in our world that allow everybody to participate. Not we're going to set up this space and then try to figure out what to do with XYZ person, but actually our spaces are going to accommodate all people, and that we are all at a loss if we leave somebody out, and we all gain and benefit if everybody is there contributing their gifts. So that's what inclusion is. And when you apply that to school, that looks like all kids learning, working, playing together, even if their goals are not the same. So you can include kids in all kinds of ways. And one of those ways is a service delivery model called co-teaching. That service delivery model is a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher working together to teach an integrated group of kids, where both teachers are equally responsible for every single kid in that environment. And we could talk more in depth about that. You could also co-teach, here in New York, at least, we have a regulation for English language learners who need to be co-taught. So that could be an ENL teacher and a gen ed teacher
I
working
see.
together to reach all kids. So co-teaching is just one service delivery model that allows you to include kids. But what we see, at least where we are in most school systems, is they're co-teaching, but they're not including all kids. So they're co-teaching these kids, but these kids who have some more significant needs in some way or another are still in segregated environments.
Wow. And I see that too. In fact, one of our videos went semi-viral, and that was
Woo!
I know I always get excited with social media. I'm like, "Oh, okay, someone's watching, yay." And
Yay!
and I saw, and the post was that your special education teacher that is in the room is not your aide.
Right.
And we see a lot of that. We see a lot of, okay, well, that's the special ed teacher. They can go with those kids, and yay, I'm co-teaching.
Well, you know what's so funny? We call that why we have a job model, and we say that in our trainings. That's why people hire us. School district administrators call me and say, "Why am I paying two professional salaries, excuse me, when one of the people is walking around like an aide, or they're taking turns walking around like an aide?" And so our work with teachers around co-teaching, whether they're including all kids or just a pocket of kids, is to move away from whole class instruction and move into heterogeneous small group instruction for new instruction.
Mm.
So that's what we focus on. So I know, Lena, I've been around for a really long time in the education world now. And what's considered best practice swings all over the place and always had. The only thing that's been consistent in my 40 years in education is the benefits of small group instruction.
Yes, yes.
So when you have two professionals in a classroom, why one person or two people are standing in front of 25 kids is beyond me. So like I know, STEM is your thing. So if you're teaching high school bio, then one teacher is teaching about meiosis, and then the other teacher is teaching about mitosis. And then some kids are working independently on vocabulary or doing an annotated reading, and then the kids rotate to all three. So
Yes.
instead of teaching 25 kids meiosis and mitosis, you teach 8 at a time. The
Mhm.
thing that you're there to teach. And so you know exactly who gets it, exactly who doesn't get it. You can differentiate on the spot, and both people are actually teaching in small groups. So that's just a high school science example of one of the co-teaching models that involves small group instruction.
So then I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the special day classroom, SDC?
Oh, yeah, we call those self-contained here. So, in my world, in my brain, we shouldn't have any of those things. Those places don't shouldn't exist. If we're fully inclusive and we can use all of our resources to have all kids learn together, then we don't have a need for places like that. And so one of the things, and this is a very radical thing to say,
We
but I'll
like
say it
it.
anyway because you know me. We love to get into the big picture radical stuff together, is that the continuum of services that's required by the least restrictive environment clause of IDEA actually prohibits inclusion. And the reason that I say that is that every state is required to have a continuum from the most restrictive to the least restrictive environment. So what that means is that teachers have a kid in XYZ environment. So say they're in co-teaching, they're in a gen ed setting with a co-teacher, and it's not working out well for whatever reason. There's always a place to send them. This place over here could be better. That place over there, that segregated school, that segregated classroom would be better for them. But where I was trained, there was no place to send people.
Mm.
So we had no choice but to figure it out. We had
Mhm.
no choice. So, I mean, not that we viewed it that way, but so you bring in different brains, people with different knowledge, people with different backgrounds, people with different ideas to problem solve and figure it out. But because there's always a more restrictive place you could send kids, the problem solving stops at some place. particularly because not that many people really believe that all kids should be included. So can I give you
Mm.
an example?
Yes, yes, let's get into it.
I have a couple of great ones for you in your area in science. Um, so I was working with a fourth grade team, um, which had a student with intellectual disability. She had Down syndrome included in their class. It was not a co-teaching situation. So she received what's called direct and indirect consultant teacher services. I don't know if that's a terminal. It's different. People use different words for each service in different states. But what that means is there's a special ed teacher assigned to her overall that monitors her IEP and consults with the classroom teacher to help them figure out how to program for that student. They might make the modifications, they would help the paraprofessional know how to interact with the kid if there is a paraprofessional. So in this situation, there was a gen ed teacher, a TA, and the consultant teacher. And then I was hired as an outside agency to come in and help them learn how to do this. So this teacher came to us with the electricity unit. And so the first thing that people don't realize they need to do when they take on a unit, when they're including somebody who's very different, is really delve deep into the objectives and the concepts of that unit and pick a couple that you're going to have this student learn. Because if they're that significantly different, they're not going to learn all of it. So let's get ahead of it. Let's be proactive and let's create really concrete, reasonable objectives for this person. So long story short, I could go on and on. I was there at the beginning of the unit and at the end of the unit. We were having a team meeting with this girl's mom and the whole teaching team. And the electricity unit was over. And the gen ed teacher said, well, what I decided to do was to have the TA verbally give her parts of the unit test. And the first two questions were things like, name two things that conduct electricity. And so the girl didn't have to write. She didn't even have to speak. She pointed to her TA's earrings and necklace, which were metal. And then when asked, can you tell us two things that don't collect there's the word electricity. She went in her desk and I don't remember what she pulled out, but it was like a
Uh-huh.
crayon and an eraser. And so she had
Wow.
clearly understood the concept. She wasn't going to take the test, but she understood the concept. And then they talked about that she, with the collaboration of the OT, was able to put the circuit together. They had a circuit building station in the room. And the mom just started to bawl. And I said to her, what's going on? And she said, if she was in that separate class for kids who are all intellectually disabled or who all have Down syndrome, the only thing about electricity that she would have learned is don't put your fingers in the socket. And
Wow.
that's true. And that's true. So did she learn the depth and breadth what every fourth grader learned about electricity? Probably not. But was she exposed to all of it? Did she work on her own personal goals and achieve them? Absolutely. So that's what inclusion could look like. But most people look at a girl like this girl and say she just doesn't belong here. She'd be better off there. I want to give you one more example if I can.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So, fifth grade, different classroom, different kid, but also with Down syndrome. And this boy had less skills than this girl had. And they were doing a unit on acids and bases. And we're about to do, the classic pH experiment with the litmus paper. And so the teacher came to me and was just like, Beth, what am I going to do? And so what we did was we looked at this kid's IEP and we lifted goals off his IEP that he could work on in this lab. So one of them was that he had an occupational therapy goal, a fine motor goal of pincer grasp, which is being able to hold something like this.
Yeah.
And so we made him the official dropper of solutions. So he was part of the lab setup team. And he had a beaker and he had a dropper and he put solutions in all the beakers for all the lab groups as with the other kids who were putting together the lab for the teacher. So he worked on that goal. And then in his lab group, his job, he had a goal of describing things in 3 words. So his job in the lab was to look at the litmus paper and describe it. So he said things like, it is wet, or it turned red. So he was working on a speech and language goal in this lab. He was also working on his social skills by working in this lab. So did he learn about acids and bases? I honestly don't know. His ability to communicate with us was so small that we didn't have a way to really assess that. But he was a part of it, he was included in it, and he worked on 2 of his IEP goals in the classroom. as opposed to down the hall somewhere else, completely disconnected from what's going on for fifth graders.
Wow. I I'm just amazed at how this is able to happen, and yet the rate of moments like this happening is so small, so far and few in between. It's
Mhm.
like they're like tiny islands of success. What
Yep.
systemically has to change?
Everything. I mean,
It sounds like it.
literally everything. I mean, what's sad for me is that like cases like these two kids that I've just explained, like an administrator or a parent really pushes for it, or an administrator believes in it, and we come in and we train and we help people learn it, and then it goes by the wayside. It's because most people don't believe it's the right thing.
Mhm.
Most people inherently, people with disabilities are still the population that most people believe are better off somewhere else.
Hmm.
And so
Freudian slip.
until that mindset shifts in our culture, parents and individuals who are disabled are continually going to have to fight this. I was about to write about this today, but I don't know. Did you watch the Grammys?
I did.
Okay. So did you see
Snippets.
Joni? Did you see Joni Mitchell?
I did not, but I heard it was such a good performance.
So I saw the clip of her at the Newport Folk Festival that was that last summer or the summer before. And really what has happened is Brandy Carlisle and other people in her life have figured out what supports she needs to give her gifts again to the world. She's not doing this on her own. She's not able to walk onto the stage. She's not able to know exactly what to say. She needs supports. But because she was already this immensely valued person in our culture, it's seen as beautiful and wonderful, and it is. I mean, I
Mhm.
cried my eyes out. However, for people who are born with disabilities, like what Joni has right now, who'd have difficulty with the many things she has difficulty with, unfortunately, the intrinsic value is not perceived in the same way as somebody who becomes disabled after they've already shown what their value is.
Wow. Yeah.
And so we don't spend our time looking at folks and going, how do we include them in our community? How do we make, I'm not saying that nobody does, but I'm saying overall as a culture, it's, oh, isn't this great that there's this group home? Or isn't this great that there's this special school for these people? Or isn't it great that there's this great class down the hall for them? And again, not because people are terrible people, it's just a worldview.
Mhm.
It's just the way people believe. And people believe that special ed places have some magic.
Mhm. Mhm.
But we know that the long-term results of those separate classrooms in terms of employment and higher education are very, very poor. I
And
don't have the statistics off the top of my head, though.
can we talk a little bit more about that, about the placement process too? Because I was teaching algebra to a special day class,
Mm,
and and I was thinking a lot of the designations were emotionally disturbed or learning disability. So there were these designations,
mhm,
and the when I was teaching though, the students were not drastically different or any different than the students in my general education class.
uh-huh.
So what is going on there?
That's a great, great, great question. I think, again, there is this just inherent belief system that somehow separate is better for them. And, again, that's not to say that certain kids do need moments away from large groups of people um and that sometimes need a very small group situation. And I'm not denying any of that, but we don't start with everybody belongs together and then let's see how we're going to individualize to different people. We start with these kinds of people belong here. and these kinds of people belong here, and these kinds of people belong here. And in this day and age where we are working so hard on DEI, uh, often disability is left out of that conversation. That there is still the belief. There aren't a lot of people in the education world who would say that, children of XYZ race are better off altogether over there. But they would say that about kids with disabilities in many
Wow.
places still. So, in that instance that you're talking about, Lena, my guess is that somebody decided that this handful of kids were better off in a smaller environment. Um, and often classes like that don't work so well.
Whoa. Okay. All right. So now that's definitely something to chew on. I want to know
Yes.
what are the issues, because you talk about race and you talk about disability, you talk about DEI,
Mhm.
and yet they get conflated when it comes to special education, and there's a lot of intersectionality, and
Totally.
we see, at least I've seen, an overrepresentation of
Oh,
Black and brown students, particularly Black and brown boys, in special
totally.
education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is there a question there? That's just a statement. Like there's
That I
that just is. It just is. And I don't know about where, the places that you've taught or the places that you're working with now in your company, but where I live, most of the teachers are white
Mhm,
still, and the
mhm,
kids are not. And so the issues of cultural responsiveness are tremendous.
mhm.
Tremendous. And yes, there is a well-known all over the United States overrepresentation of kids of color in special ed. Absolutely. But nobody would say that they're separating them because they're of a different race.
I see.
Nobody would say that. They're not going to
Right.
make the class for the black boys, or at least they're not going to verbally say that that's what it is.
So then they find this way to, and through the special education classifications.
Mhm. And again, I'm not saying that that's their intent. I'm not saying that the people who are labeling kids are trying to do that. I just think that that's the inherent nature of institutional racism
Yeah.
that just exists. When I was in college, I took a class on racism, Cornell University, and a long time ago. And we had this amazing, amazing professor, and we read this book called The Portraits of White Racism. So I learned about this whole notion of institutional racism in the 80s. And he talked about the biases that existed at that time in IQ testing. And
Mm.
he gave us an example, a very concrete example that I've never forgotten. He probably gave us others, but for some reason, this one stuck with me. And it was take these four letters and arrange them to spell a sport. And the letters were O, O, P, and L. Okay. And so kids said pool, and it was wrong because the answer was polo.
Oh, wow. I was thinking pool.
Yeah, yeah. Because polo was the correct answer. Because guess who wrote those tests?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I don't study IQ tests or anything like that, but I'm sure there still are some inherent biases in
Mhm,
those tests. And I certainly know at that time there were, but certainly, black boys are looked at in relation to ability to sit still, ability to attend, all those things, and get labeled very easily, more easily than other populations of kids. And I've even had some of my staff say to me, "Hey, Beth, I'm in this classroom and it's a mostly white group of kids, and then there's this brown boy, and they treat him totally different than everybody else in the room."
oh gosh.
So, we have those issues. So there's a tremendous intersectionality. And then there's the belief system about people with disabilities that they're better off over here because it's going to be better for them. So you
Mhm,
combine all that together, and you still have the situation where parents are fighting to have their kids included who have significant disabilities, and where we still have a lot of separate classrooms.
I see. And okay, so now we obviously see a huge issue with the system.
Correct.
And let's talk about the pre-service teachers, because I've taught pre-service teachers,
Hmm.
and I think when I taught special education, it was maybe an hour of one of my classes, and
Yep.
we focused more on science methods.
Yep.
And that's just the nature of the syllabus and whatnot, and assuming so that there's another special education class that they take. So I'm thinking that our future teachers, our pre-service teachers, they're taking either a class in special ed here, maybe another hour or two in their methods course, and
Yep.
then that's it. And now there's an expectation, hey, you should be teaching, you should be co-teaching, ready, set, go.
Right. Exactly. And there's a lot of ready, set, going we have in pre-service. I actually have a dear friend and colleague who is a professor at a local college doing pre-service, teaching teachers how to teach, and she's focused on special ed. And in the our state is starting to change the requirements for special ed, making them more even more less. I'm having trouble with English right now.
Yeah.
Having the requirements being even smaller than what they used to be. So yeah, a lot of teachers don't have any um, exposure to the depth of what's needed for kids with disabilities, and even people who are duly certified often, they've taken 4 special ed classes and that's it. And then, don't get me started to talk about student teaching. You student teach for 6 weeks, and then
Right,
you move on somewhere else for 6 weeks. And how do you understand the depth and breadth of what needs to happen from September to June
right,
for all
right.
kids in that construct? Like where I went to when I went to school a long time ago, and in the specific program I was in, my master's program, we co we taught full time from September to June in the same classroom, and it's where I learned everything that I know. 'Cause I saw it
Yeah.
all, the whole process.
And because of the tremendous teacher shortage,
Right,
it's just like we just got to get teachers, we got to get them anywhere anyhow. Let's go.
exactly, exactly, and, that's why we have jobs. My company, is that people don't know how to do this stuff, and so they need somebody to come in and do PD around how to do some of this stuff because people don't know. They don't have the training that they need.
And I want to go back to this being a huge systemic issue.
Yes.
And yes, while your company is fantastic and great, you're there are way too many schools and way too many districts. I know your company can take on a lot, but at this
No.
point, it's like we need to start from the beginning and
Yeah,
rebuild.
absolutely, and I don't know how to do that, to be honest, but we talk about it all the time. The system and the structures are problematic. Even the structure of school, you know, we do this for 45 minutes and then we move on.
Right, right.
And even the under the guise of rigor becomes we do a completely different lesson every day. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter if you got lesson 1, but we're moving on to lesson 2.2.
Yes,
And
yes.
so there's so many things about the way we're currently structured that need to be changed. Um,
Wow.
and it overwhelms me to think about it, to be perfectly honest.
Let's talk about the parents, because I heard you talk about the parents that's saying, I want my child included. I want
Yes.
them to be in this classroom.
Yes.
What about the parents that say, I don't want their child in my class with my student?
Right. So you're talking about the parents of kids without disabilities who are
Correct.
saying, right. And so those people that sounded terrible, people who say things like that have had no experiences of being around people with disabilities.
Hmm.
So they're terrified, just like how people of different backgrounds and different races or whatever. And they're also under the notion that their child's education is going to suffer because this child is in this class.
Yes.
So one of the things we work with administrative bodies on is how do you communicate about what's happening in these classes to the whole community? So just the way they would talk about what their STEM curriculum is,
Mhm.
just the way they would talk about what their reading program is. This is what's happening in these classes. Your child is in a class with two teachers and therefore is learning math X number of days a week in a group of 7.
Mhm.
Your child is going to get the attention of 2 learning specialists throughout the year. There are so many ways to help parents to understand that this isn't a damaging thing for their kid.
Mhm.
So it's about education. It's about talking to their community about inclusive education and what the purposes are and what um, the benefits are for all students, because there's a whole laundry list of them.
Yeah.
But mostly what happens is that nobody gets any education.
Mhm.
So rumors fly. I'll never forget this. This years ago. We are really big proponents of teachers talking to kids about what's going on in their classroom, including if there's a kid who's significantly different, being honest about it. It's like, yeah, he does rock when he is excited, and that's okay. And that's what this is why, because this is what his body needs. Just very like matter of fact, not giving away confidential information. But there was a boy in the school that I was working with who had a form of cerebral palsy that affected his the aperture of his mouth.
Mhm.
And so he spit when he talked, which, for little kids is gross.
Yeah.
That's how they're going to react. So I said, well, let's do an education thing for the kids in the class and the kids in his grade about what's going on with his mouth. We could do exercises and show them what happens and why it happens and what they can do so that they're not spit on if they're concerned about that, and to allay their fears that they're going to get sick from him, because that was the thing. They
Mhm.
wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. So all year, the principal was getting complaints from the parents that their kids were getting sick from this kid because they
Mhm.
weren't willing to sit down with the class and deal with the reality of the issue. So one of the things we also specialize in is this whole notion of community building.
Mhm.
And why parents are saying, I don't want my kid in a class with that kid, is often based on rumor, speculation, lack of understanding, and lack of information about what's really going on. So that takes
Wow.
a whole other look at how we build community in our schools, in our classrooms, and in our larger school community.
And what I love about your company policy really or just kind of framework is that you make sure that you work with the administrators and the teachers. Like it is a
Yes.
non-negotiable.
Correct. Correct, correct, correct. We must be in a room with the administrators in order to work with their teachers. We won't sign a contract unless we do that, because this can't, cultural change of a whole system doesn't happen with a classroom teacher. They contribute to it, but they are not responsible for it. And in addition, when responsible for it by themselves. And
Mhm.
in addition, any PD from our perspective that's provided to teachers has to be provided to admins, or else they're not on the same page. They're not speaking the same language. They don't have the same expectations. And I've seen that earlier in my career before I made this a non-negotiable, Lena. And I don't know if you've had this experience at all, but we'd go in and we train teachers in something. And then the next time we came to see them, they would say that some admin came in and did an observation and criticized them for it.
Mhm. Mhm. We've seen that.
Yep, because the admin didn't understand. So we just don't play those games anymore. It's just you've got to be in the room with us and we've got to be on the same page if you want us to work with your teachers. So yes, that's a and some of the administrative bodies we work with really want to take on systems change and don't, and some don't. Some just really want us to train everybody on co-teaching and have everybody using the same strategies and the same language, and that's what they want to do, which is, you know, not my favorite thing, but certainly okay.
And that's the thing. You don't come in with this toolbox of strategies. This isn't like a strategy. You can't strategy your way out of this. This is an entire mindset shift and
Well, yes
community
and no.
building.
Yes and no. If people want to really take on inclusive education, it is a whole mind shift. Why am I having trouble with mindset shift? It is a whole mindset shift, in addition to a huge, huge toolbox. But if what people want from us is to help their co-teachers not do what you're saying, that one teacher is just looking like an aide, we can come and teach tons of strategies for to get them to
Mhm,
move away from that. It doesn't mean that the philosophy changes or the range of kids that they include changes, but we can get people to co-teach much better and do much better for the kids who happen to be in that class
mhm.
with a huge toolbox that we bring. So we bring, the philosophy and all that part if people want to go there. But there's a tremendous amount of tools for co-teaching, for differentiating the instruction, for modifying, for community building that can be applied just in the co-teaching classes, if that's what people want to do.
Wow. So question for you. As I'm looking at the time, it looks like we've got to wrap up already. And I feel like that we only scratched the surface. And I want to know, many of our audience, they're STEM educators, a lot of them are administrators, leaders in the field, teachers are leaders in the field as well. What can what can our audience take away? What is one thing or maybe three things that they can start?
Well, I think the first thing that anybody in a leadership position, whether they're the leader of a classroom, the leader of a building, the leader of a department, the leader of a school system, is to take a hard, honest look at their own belief about inclusion. Who do you believe belongs? Where does that line stop? Who don't you believe belongs? Why? Like, the first piece of any of this is to look at your own belief system and get really clear on what you believe and why you believe it, and if there's any room to stretch it or not. Because you can't plan for what's needed systemically if you haven't first done a deep dive into your own belief system. Again, whether you're leading a classroom as a teacher or a department or a school or a school district. And we do have some questions that people can ask themselves if people want to contact me and ask for those. So that's the first step, always, regardless of what you're looking to do. You wanted two more. I think the next piece is what kind of supports, training are you providing for your co-teachers so that they have the opportunity to work together, plan together, problem solve together, and that they have been given some tools to use. Because just like you were saying, Lena, people come out of pre-service and it's just like, okay, go. That's what
Mhm.
people do to co-teachers too. Oh, we're going to put these two people in a room together and just they'll figure it out. And that's not okay. There's a whole, I like to say technology, but not technology the way we talk about technology. There's a whole bank of strategies and techniques that people need to know to
Right.
co-teach well, but we just expect them to co-teach well because we put them together. So, what are you providing them for relationship building, for partnership building? What are you providing for them so that they have some things to try in their classroom? And what kind of support are you giving them to do those things?
Well, and to interject, this can actually work with classrooms that have aides too, right?
Sure. Well, sure, on some level. I mean, co-teaching involves two teachers. So when you have aides or paraprofessionals of some sort, you can do some modifications of some of these techniques, but the communication part absolutely needs to be there when you have more than one adult working in a classroom, which that's a whole other thing in those self-contained situations, those special classes. When there's a paraprofessional in there, how does that all work? So that would be the second piece. And then the third piece would be who's your problem solving team?
Hmm.
Who are the people who come from different perspectives, have different skill sets, who when teacher comes to you and says, "Hey, Beth is really struggling in my class and I'm out of ideas." There are people who have ideas that are past preferential seating and give them 5 less problems than everybody else. That really can think outside of the box for how to plan and program for this kid. So who is that brainstorm team? Who is that problem solving team?
Yeah.
And so those would be 3 things that I would start with.
Wow. Wow, Beth. This has been such a rich conversation, and all of your any resources and anything will be added to the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much for everything, for all the stories and the rich experiences and knowledge that you're able to share with our team.
Thank you, Lena. It's been an honor to be here. And, I love talking to you any old time. So, thank you.